All right, gang, I'm off to the opening evening premiere screening of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children.
There's a new world coming.
Say that 10 times without stopping. Now, I've always been a fan of director Tim Burton's work. I mean, he's got this really quirky, idiosyncratically weird and eccentric visual aesthetic slash thingy that really permeates a lot of his films. And I think there's a reason why when people sometimes use the words Tim Burton-esque, it's an apt descriptor, because he certainly has a signature style that is entirely his own. Having said that, though, it's been an awfully long time since I've been really enamored with a Tim Burton movie. I do like Burton's willingness to explore and experiment with subject matter in his films, but sometimes I think he does get trapped within a bottle of his own idiosyncratic weirdness. Weirdos, yeah. I like the trailers for Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Most importantly, the film stars Asa Butterfield, who I think is a really wonderful young actor. I thought he was superb in Martin Scorsese's Hugo. Most importantly, though, this movie stars the Eva Green, and I have a thing for Eva Green.
I long for a soul who would stand by my side.
I'm going off to the cinema. I am going to check it out, and I'll be back with the review. Alright, gang, I just got out of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. That is a tongue twister indeed. This is a very convoluted film. I think it's also a much darker and more macabre and creepy film than I was frankly expecting. And I would maybe caution families against taking very young children to this, because it does get very twisted and unnerving in parts. Basically, Asa Butterfield plays this young man named Jake, whose grandfather, played by Terence Stamp, had experiences in World War II with this very special home that was looked after by Miss Peregrine.
Right on time. Miss Peregrine, delighted to meet you.
And she basically runs this house, which features a huge group of children with unique abilities.
Wait, what's happening?
This one's coming to a...
They live within a special 24-hour time loop, and where they can stay safe and secluded from the outside world.
We create a time loop. A loop preserves the last 24 hours. Reset the loop, and you can stay here forever.
They are unable to escape from this loop and live within our normal temporal reality, because that would affect their well-being, and they would essentially age in a rather accelerated fashion, and then they would end up dying. So after a rather tragic event befalls Jake, he ends up traveling to the UK to discover this looped location that his grandfather alluded to, which would basically let him know where Miss Peregrine's home actually is. And Jake finds himself magically whisked away to this home, where he meets Peregrine, who's played by the remarkably easy on the eyes Eva Green. I mean, the camera just loves this woman.
I knew you were one of us when you were born. It's time for you to learn what you can do.
I thought she was really good in this film. I really have liked her in just about every film I've seen her in.
I long for a soul who would stand by my side.
And he meets this the other misfit members of this really strange family unit. I mean,
he's invisible.
Of course.
We're what's known in common parlance as peculiar.
One of these peculiar children, a pint-sized child, she has superhuman strength.
Jake, come and play.
Another young girl has the ability to manipulate gravity and air. There's another woman who is basically a fire starter and can manipulate fire, and so on. I mean, I can maybe understand where some critics and media people have been sort of drawing some parallels between this and maybe X-Men. I guess the Peculiars are essentially mutated children. We learned that it's actually handed down from generation to generation. So yeah, it's kind of like mutants in the X-Men film, but nah, not really. Jake discovers that there's this radical faction of peculiar beings who basically separated themselves apart from the good peculiars. And again, for reasons far too complicated to explain, they ended up turning into these really strange, ravenous monsters who have to feed off of the eyeballs. I'm not making this up. They have to feed off of the eyeballs of normal peculiars in order to help revert them back to human form. And one of them is played by Samuel L. Jackson, who looks suspiciously like a much older and scarier version of Mr. Glass from Unbreakable.
I assure you, we are coming.
They called me Mr. Glass.
And of course, he causes a lot of problems for Miss Peregrine and her peculiar children. On a positive, I can certainly understand how Burton was really drawn to this material. I think it is completely within his wheelhouse of, again, the absurd and the macabre. And I mean, the production values on this film are really quite stupendous. You can see Burton's visual esoteric fingerprints all over this movie. I thought, again, it looks really sensational, and I really like the way he plays with the different time periods, because it's partially set in 2016, it's also partially set in 1943, and it plays off of one another really, really well. I appreciate the fact that it was, again, darker than I was expecting. I don't think it plays safe with the material. It doesn't soft pedal the material. Again, I think it was sort of advertised as a bit more family friendly than it really is. So I don't want to make it sound like that's a knock against the film. But again, I would caution taking really young children to this film unless you want to see a scene of Samuel L. Jackson in a frightening wig munching on eyeballs at a dinner table.
They called me Mr. Glass.
It's not an appealing sight.
No. Mm-mm.
If I'm going to come down on this film, I'd have to say this. Asa Butterfield is a young actor that I have admired. I really liked him in Hugo, as I alluded to earlier. I also really liked him in Ender's Game. I thought, again, he was probably the best part of that movie. But I think in this film, I thought he was really kind of stiff and mannered, and I thought he kind of gave a bland and charmless performance.
I'm just ordinary.
No, you're not.
And I thought he was really one of the weak links of this film, and he's like the main character, but I didn't feel a lot of energy in his performance, and that really sort of held the film back for me. Another thing that I think really held the film back for me too was this film is so exposition heavy. Like so many other films of its nature, it's trying to explain all the particulars of this peculiar world and all of these characters, and introduce their conflicts and their relationships and how the weird temporal logic of this film works. And initially, I think the first half of the film works really, really well, and then it starts to get more bogged down with the history of these characters, and I think it really suffers from momentum issues as the film progresses.
Because our abilities don't fit in the outside world. We live in places like this.
Also, Samuel L. Jackson's villain,
They called me Mr. Glass.
I thought he was kind of really criminally underutilized. I mean, he's sort of alluded to here and there. He's kind of, I guess, the Voldemort figure of this film. And again, I hate to draw those Harry Potter, you know, allusions to this film as the media has been drawing, but he really is kind of the Voldemort character, a character that is spoken of a lot, but never fully revealed until the very, very end. And I think in a rather disappointing fashion. That's not to say that Samuel L. Jackson doesn't seem invested in this part. He seems to be having a real, perversely fun time playing this unfortunately underwritten character. I think the film also had me asking a lot of questions. Its time period / loop logic, and how certain periods related to other, and how loops worked, and I found it a little bit confusing. I can only imagine what young children watching this movie would probably feel as a result.
It's a chance to do something that changes everything.
Because it has momentum and pacing issues, it feels a lot longer than it actually is. I think it ran at just a little over 2 hours, which I think it could have been trimmed here and there. I liked so much of what I saw in this film. I think Tim Burton as a visualist is at the absolute height and zenith of his directorial powers. I think he was just born to direct this film. I really liked Eva Green. I like the central premise of this film, but I think Asa Butterfield's performance was really, I hate to say, again, he was really wooden in this film. I just think he lacked personality. He was just sort of a blank slate. And I think ultimately, I'm kind of on the fence as to whether or not I'm really recommending this, that you seek it out in the theater, because there are parts that I really enjoyed, and there are parts that really sort of held me back. So anyway, there's my review of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the film. Also, let me know what some of your favorite Tim Burton films are.
Weirdos, yeah.
Thank you very much for watching. If you could like this video, I would really appreciate it. If you could also subscribe to my channel, that would mean, again, the absolute world to me. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you at the movies.